The unspoken promise, the scent of jasmine drifted through the open windows of the small Lisbon apartment. Olivia Reeves carefully pressed another flower specimen between the pages of her research journal, adding notes in her precise handwriting. The Botanical Research Fellowship had brought her to Portugal for the summer, but it was the unexpected encounter with Dominic Vega that had transformed her careful plans into something beautifully uncharted. "Are you cataloging the entire city?" Dominic asked, leaning against the doorframe. His dark eyes crinkled with amusement as he watched her work. Unlike the stiff business attire he wore for his family's meetings, today he was casual in a faded t-shirt that made him look younger than 20-8. Olivia smiled without looking up. "Only the interesting parts." "And where do I fall in your classification system?" He moved behind her, warm hands resting on her shoulders. "Definitely an invasive species." She tilted her head back to meet his gaze. "Completely disrupted my ecosystem." Dominic laughed, the sound rich and warm in the golden afternoon light. "You love it." She did, though they'd met only 6 weeks ago when she'd accidentally trespassed on his family's hotel grounds to document a rare orchid. Something about Dominic felt like coming home. He was supposed to be overseeing the Portuguese expansion of his family's luxury hotel chain, not spending his afternoons with an American botanist obsessed with endangered flowers. "The botanical gardens curator called," Olivia said, closing her journal. "They want to feature my research on sustainable urban green spaces at their conference next spring." Dominic's face lit up. "That's incredible. We should celebrate." "It's just preliminary interest," she protested, but he was already pulling her to her feet. "It's everything you've been working toward," he insisted. "Let me take you somewhere special tonight." That evening they dined on a cliffside restaurant overlooking the Atlantic, under a canopy of stars, with the distant sound of fado music drifting up from the streets below. Dominic reached for her hand across the table. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "The Vienna property opens in December. It has the most incredible conservatory. You'd love it. Come with me." Olivia's heart stuttered. "To Vienna? But my research position ends in September, and I'm supposed to return to Boston, so apply for an extension, or find a position there, or just come because I'm asking you to." His eyes held something serious she rarely saw. "I know it sounds impulsive, but these past weeks, I've never felt this way about anyone." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "It's fast," she whispered. "It is," he agreed, "but it's real." Later that night, tangled in sheets with the moonlight painting patterns across their skin, Olivia believed him. For someone who had always approached life with careful planning and analysis, loving Dominic felt like stepping into freefall, terrifying and exhilarating. "Tell me more about these gardens you'll design someday," he murmured against her hair. "They'll be healing spaces," she said, tracing patterns on his chest, "places where people can reconnect with nature and themselves. Gardens have this power to transform, to help people grow through grief or trauma, like your mother's garden did for you." She nodded, touched that he remembered. "After Dad died, that garden was the only place that made sense. I want to create that for others." "You will," he promised, "and I'll help you." The next 2 weeks were a blur of happiness. They explored hidden courtyards and secret gardens throughout Lisbon, made plans for Vienna, and fell deeper into something neither had expected to find. Then came the phone call. Olivia knew something was wrong the moment Dominic answered. His body tensed, his expression hardened into something she barely recognized as he spoke rapid Spanish into the phone. When he hung up, he looked at her with devastation in his eyes. "My father's had a heart attack. I have to go back to Madrid immediately." She helped him pack, drove him to the airport, kissed him goodbye with promises to wait for his call, to join him if he needed her. "I'll come back for you," he promised, his forehead pressed against hers. "Whatever happens, remember that." For 3 days, she heard nothing. Then, a brief text message arrived that shattered everything. "I'm sorry, Olivia. What happened between us was a mistake. My life is taking a different direction now. Please don't contact me again." No explanation, no goodbye, just clinical words that didn't sound like the man who had held her heart. She called, texted, emailed. It was as if Dominic Vega had vanished, taking the future they'd planned together with him. 2 weeks later, she saw the announcement online. Dominic Vega, heir to the Vega Hospitality Group, had become engaged to Valentina Ortiz, daughter of Spain's wealthiest banking family. That night, Olivia packed away her journals filled with pressed flowers and shredded dreams, and booked an early flight back to Boston. She would build her gardens of healing alone, and bury the memory of the summer that had nearly changed everything. Gardens of healing. 5 years could change everything and nothing at all. Olivia knelt in the damp soil of the community garden, her fingers working methodically to plant seedlings, alongside a teenage boy who hadn't spoken a word in the 3 weeks he'd been coming to her therapy program. "The roots need space to stretch," she explained softly, demonstrating with gentle movements, "just like people." Tyler nodded, mimicking her technique with surprising care for someone whose case file described him as aggressive and uncooperative. His therapist had referred him to Olivia's Greenspace Healing initiative as a last resort, skeptical that gardening could succeed where traditional therapy had failed. But Olivia had seen this transformation. dozens of times over the past 4 years. Something about working with the earth, a combination of physical labor, nurturing life, and quiet companionship reached people when words couldn't. That's perfect, she encouraged as Tyler finished planting his row of tomato seedlings. A slight smile flickered across his face before disappearing, but it was enough. Progress happened in tiny increments, just like growth in her garden. As their session ended, Olivia watched Tyler walk toward his waiting social worker. His shoulders weren't as hunched today. Small victories, Ms. Reeves. Her assistant Prisha appeared, clutching a tablet. Do you have a minute? It's about the funding situation. Olivia sighed, brushing soil from her knees as she stood. The reality of running a non-profit was never far away, especially one as perpetually underfunded as hers. On the small office converted from an old groundskeeper's shed, Prisha didn't waste time softening the blow. The city's cutting our grant by 60% next quarter. With the lease renewal coming up, she didn't need to finish. We can't close, Olivia said firmly. I'll figure something out. But the truth loomed like a shadow. The community garden served over 80 participants, weakly troubled teens, veterans with PTSD, elderly patients with depression, children dealing with grief. They couldn't simply uproot and move, and without the grant money, they couldn't afford to stay. That evening, Olivia stayed late, walking the pathways between carefully tended plots. What had begun as a small research project had blossomed into her life's work. The space had once been an abandoned lot, choked with weeds and debris. Now it was an oasis in the city, with raised beds of vegetables, fragrant herb spirals, a small orchard of dwarf fruit trees, and flower beds that bloomed in carefully orchestrated succession throughout the growing season. It wasn't just plants that grew here. It was hope, confidence, connection. The thing she herself had needed after. Dominic. Olivia rarely allowed herself to think his name anymore. After returning from Portugal, she'd thrown herself into research, then into creating this place. The Botanical Gardens Conference had led to a small grant, which led to a pilot program, which grew into what she now had. Her broken heart had somehow led her exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Probably another funding rejection, but she checked anyway. Bess Reeves. I represent an anonymous donor interested in supporting the Green Space Healing Initiative. My client would like to cover your lease renewal and provide operational funding for the next 3 years, with potential for ongoing support. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss details. Sincerely, Eleanor Wright, Wright Financial Services. Olivia read the email 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. Anonymous donations of this size didn't just materialize out of thin air. It had to be a mistake. But Eleanor Wright confirmed everything the next morning in her downtown office, sliding a contract across her immaculate desk. My client is quite serious about supporting your work, Ms. Reeves. They've followed your program's development with great interest. May I ask why? Olivia questioned, still suspicious. Most donors want their names on buildings or, at minimum, tax write-offs. Eleanor's professional smile revealed nothing. They believe in your mission. That's all I'm at liberty to say. Despite her misgivings, Olivia signed the papers. She couldn't afford pride when her program's survival was at stake. 3 days later, everything made horrifying sense when she received an invitation to meet with developers from Vega Sustainable Hospitality, a new eco-friendly branch of the Vega Hospitality Group. They're interested in incorporating community garden concepts into their new property, Prisha explained excitedly. This could be huge publicity for us. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. Who exactly will be at this meeting? Some development team and their new sustainability director. I think his name was… Prisha checked her notes. Dominic Vega. The shock must have shown on her face because Prisha frowned with concern. Are you okay? Do you know him? No, Olivia managed. Not anymore. She considered canceling. With curiosity and something darker, something that felt dangerously like unresolved hope, pushed her to agree to the meeting. The next afternoon, in a downtown conference room with sweeping views of the harbor, Olivia waited, heart hammering against her ribs. When the door finally opened, the years collapsed like a house of cards. Dominic stood frozen in the doorway. He looked older, more serious. The playful warmth she remembered had been replaced by something weathered. A thin scar ran along his jawline that hadn't been there before. His expensive suit couldn't hide that he had lost weight, and faint shadows underlined his eyes. Olivia, he said, her name sounding like a prayer and a confession. Mr. Vega, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I believe you wanted to discuss garden design concepts. Understanding flickered in his eyes. She was offering a professional facade, a way to get through this impossible moment. Yes, he said quietly, following her lead. Thank you for coming. The meeting proceeded with excruciating formality. Dominic presented plans for an urban hotel with living walls, rooftop gardens, and community green spaces. His team discussed environmental impact studies and community integration. Olivia offered insights with detached expertise, ignoring the way her skin burned when his gaze lingered too long on her face. As the meeting concluded, Dominic asked if she would stay behind to discuss specifics. She should have refused, but found herself nodding. When they were alone, the silence stretched between them like an abyss. "You're the anonymous donor," she finally said. "Not a question." "Yes, why?" He looked out at the skyline, hands in his pockets. "I saw an article about your program last year. I recognized your name. So this is what? Charity? Guilt? It's admiration," he said simply. "What you've built is extraordinary, Olivia." She gathered her materials, unable to process the collision of past and present. "Thank you for the funding. I'll have my team send over some preliminary concept drawings for your project." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "My wife died 2 years ago." Olivia turned, genuinely shocked. "Car accident," he continued, his voice hollow. "After that, I left the family business. It started over with this sustainable division. It's smaller, but it's mine." She didn't know what to say, what response he wanted from her. "I'm sorry for your loss," she finally offered. "I lost everything that mattered long before that," he said quietly, "starting with you." Thorns between us. The conference room felt unnaturally quiet as Olivia stared at the contract before her. 3 meetings and countless emails had culminated in this moment. An official partnership between her Greenspace Healing Initiative and Vega Sustainable Hospitality. The terms were beyond generous funding for an expanded therapy garden at their new eco-hotel site, plus resources to extend her program to 5 additional locations across the city. It should have been a triumph. Instead, her pen hovered uncertainly over the signature line. "We don't have to do this," Prisha said gently from across the table. "There are other funding options we could explore." They both knew that wasn't true. The city's budget cuts had only deepened, and traditional grants wouldn't come close to what Dominic was offering. "It's a good deal," Olivia said firmly, signing her name with a decisive stroke. "The program comes first." Later that afternoon, standing in the vacant lot that would become their flagship therapeutic garden, Olivia tried to focus on measurements and soil quality instead of the man walking toward her. Dominic had traded his business suit for jeans and a simple button, looking more like the person she'd known in Portugal than the corporate executive from their recent meetings. "Your team has already started the environmental assessment," she said without preamble, gesturing toward the specialists taking soil samples across the lot. "Olivia," his voice stopped her practiced professionalism. "Can we talk? Really talk?" She'd been avoiding this moment for weeks, keeping their interactions strictly professional, surrounded by others. Now, with the contract signed and the project underway, her excuses had run out. "Fine," she conceded, "but not here." They walked in silence to a small cafe 3 blocks away, the kind of place that seemed designed for difficult conversations, with secluded tables and gentle acoustic music that made eavesdropping impossible. "Thank you," Dominic said when they were seated with coffees neither seemed interested in drinking, "for agreeing to the partnership, for hearing me out now." Olivia folded her hands on the table. "You said you wanted to talk, so talk." The directness seemed to catch him off guard, but he nodded. "I owe you an explanation about what happened 5 years ago." "You don't owe me anything, Dominic. It was a summer fling that didn't work out. People move on." His expression tightened. "Is that what you think it was? What else could it have been? You left, got engaged to someone else, and disappeared from my life without so much as a phone call. It wasn't by choice." Olivia laughed bitterly. "There's always a choice, not always." Something in his voice made her look up sharply. The pain in his eyes wasn't performative. "When I got to Madrid after my father's heart attack, I found out the truth about our family business." He rubbed his hands over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "The Vega hotels were a front, had been for years. My father was laundering money for some very dangerous people. When he had the heart attack, they came to me, expected me to take over the arrangement." Olivia's coffee grew cold as Dominic explained how his world had imploded. His father, recovering in the hospital, had confessed everything: how he'd started borrowing from loan sharks years before, how one bad decision led to another until the family business became entangled with a powerful criminal organization. "They made it very clear," Dominic continued, voice hollow, "that if I didn't cooperate, they would target the people I cared about. They knew about you, Olivia. They showed me surveillance photos of us in Lisbon." She felt a chill run through her. "That's why you sent that message?" He nodded. "I thought if I cut all ties, made it absolutely clear we were over, you'd be safe." Then they arranged the engagement to Valentina. Her father was involved too. The banking connection made the money laundering easier. "So your marriage was a business arrangement," he finished. Valentina knew that. She had her own reasons for accepting. A shadow crossed his face. "We became friends. Eventually, she didn't deserve what happened to her." "The car accident," Olivia murmured. Dominic stared into his untouched coffee. "It wasn't an accident. It was a warning to me. I'd been gathering evidence, working with authorities to bring down the operation. Someone found out." Olivia reached across the table instinctively, her fingers brushing his. He looked up, surprised at the contact. "After Valentina died, I cooperated with an international investigation. My testimony helped dismantle the network. When it was over, my father went to prison. The family business collapsed, and I walked away with nothing but a target on my back." "The scar?" she asked quietly, gesturing toward his jawline. A reminder to stay quiet. His smile was grim. "It took 2 years to rebuild, to create something legitimate, something I could be proud of." Olivia withdrew her hand, processing everything. Why didn't you find me afterward, when it was safe? I tried, he admitted. A year ago, I tracked you to Boston, but by then you'd established your program. You seemed settled. I watched you once working with a group of veterans in your garden. You looked happy, purposeful. He shrugged. I convinced myself you were better off without the complications I would bring. That wasn't your decision to make, she said, anger finally finding its voice. 5 years, Dominic, 5 years of wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. You could have found a way to tell me the truth. You're right, he acknowledged. I was trying to protect you, but I ended up hurting you instead. I'm sorry, Olivia, more than I can express. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She wanted to stay angry. Anger was safer than the alternative, but found herself asking, so why now? Why this project? When I saw that article about your program, something clicked. This venture into sustainable hospitality wasn't just about rebuilding my career, it was about creating something meaningful. He paused. And maybe it was about finding my way back to you, even if only professionally. Their conversation was interrupted by Olivia's phone. Prisha needed her back at the site. Something about the soil samples. As they walked back. A fragile truce between them. Dominic asked, where do we go from here? We work together, she answered carefully. We build this garden. Beyond that, I don't know. The next 3 weeks were a study in cautious navigation. They collaborated daily, their professional rapport gradually warming as they worked side by side. Dominic proved himself knowledgeable about sustainable development, having immersed himself in environmental studies during his reinvention. Olivia found herself watching him when he worked with her team, noting how he listened intently to everyone regardless of position, how he remembered personal details, how his passion for the project seemed genuine. One evening, as they reviewed plans in her office long after everyone else had left, she caught him staring at a photo on her desk. Olivia with an elderly woman tending to a magnificent rosebush. My grandmother, she explained. She moved in with me last year. The garden helps with her dementia. The healing gardens, he murmured, just like you always dreamed. Something shifted between them in that moment, the realization that despite everything, he still knew her core, still remembered her dreams. The next day, Dominic arrived at the site with architectural modifications that included a sensory garden specifically designed for dementia patients. I did some research last night, he explained, almost shy. Studies show certain layouts and plant selections can reduce anxiety and improve cognitive function for people with memory disorders. Olivia studied the detailed plans, touched by the thought behind them. This would double our capacity for the memory care program. Is that okay? She looked up at him, seeing past the professional facade to the person who had once known her better than anyone. Yes, she said softly, it's more than okay. Later that week, they discovered a complication. The soil in one section of the lot was contaminated, likely from an old gas station that had once occupied the corner. The remediation would be expensive and time-consuming. We could modify the layout, Olivia suggested during an emergency meeting. Work around that section. No, Dominic said firmly. We'll fix it properly. Your participants deserve the best possible space. His project manager looked concerned. Sir, the additional cost isn't an issue, Dominic finished. Make it happen. When they were alone, Olivia asked the question that had been troubling her. Can you afford this really? You said you lost everything. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. I'm not the billionaire I was raised to be, if that's what you're asking. But this project matters. Olivia, it's worth every penny. She studied him, seeing the earnestness in his eyes. You've changed. Having everything stripped away tends to clarify what matters, he replied. Then, more hesitantly, would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not to discuss work, just dinner. The invitation hung between them, weighted with history and possibility. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted honestly. He nodded, accepting her boundary without pushing. The invitation stands. Whenever you're ready. As Olivia drove home that evening, she realized with startling clarity that despite her best efforts, the walls around her heart were beginning to crumble. The thorns she'd cultivated to protect herself were no match for the simple truth emerging like a stubborn seedling through concrete. She was beginning to trust Dominic Vega again, and that terrified her more than anything. The storm's revelation of the forecast had predicted heavy rain, but nobody anticipated the violent storm that descended upon the city that night. Olivia woke to emergency alerts blaring from her phone and the sound of wind howling against her windows. Flash flood warnings scrolled across her screen. Along with notices of power outages throughout the district, her first thought was of the garden site. They had just finished planting the first section yesterday, delicate seedlings and young trees that wouldn't withstand the punishing winds and potential flooding. The erosion alone could set them back weeks. Without thinking, she threw on rain gear and drove through the pre-dawn darkness, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. The streets were nearly empty, most people heeding warnings to stay indoors. When she reached the site, her headlights illuminated a scene of chaos. Water was already pooling in the lower section where they'd removed the contaminated soil, threatening to flood the entire garden. The temporary fencing had partially collapsed, and tarps meant to protect the new plantings were tearing free in the violent gusts. To her shock, another vehicle was already there, Demonic's SUV. She found him struggling to secure a drainage channel, redirecting water away from the vulnerable new plantings. He was soaked through, mud-splattered, his expensive watch discarded on a nearby bench as he worked barehanded in the muck. "What are you doing here?" she shouted over the storm. He looked up, equally surprised to see her. "Trying to save our work," he called back. The drainage system failed. Without another word, they worked side by side in the punishing rain. Olivia directed their efforts based on water flow patterns, while Dominic provided the physical strength needed to move sandbags and reinforce barriers. They communicated in terse phrases and intuitive movements, falling into a rhythm that felt strangely familiar, as if they'd never spent years apart. An hour into their desperate effort, Olivia noticed the large oak at the edge of the property swaying dangerously. Its root system, partially exposed by recent grading work, wasn't stable in the saturated soil. "Dominic," she shouted, pointing toward the massive tree, "we need to clear that area." He nodded, making his way toward the roped-off section beneath the tree where their equipment was stored. As he began moving valuable supplies to safer ground, Olivia heard an ominous cracking sound. "Get out of there," she screamed, watching in horror as the giant oak began to tip. Dominic looked up, immediately grasping the danger, but instead of running to safety, he lunged toward something on the ground. The memory garden plans, stored in a waterproof case, their most detailed work irreplaceable. The massive tree came down with a thunderous crash just as Dominic dove out of its path. Olivia's scream caught in her throat as branches and debris obscured her view. "Dominic!" She raced toward the fallen tree, heart pounding. "Dominic!" She found him pinned beneath a large branch, conscious but unable to move. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, mixing with rain and mud. "I'm okay," he gasped, though his grimace belied his words. "My leg!" Olivia worked frantically to free him, adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. When she finally managed to lift the branch enough for him to pull free, he collapsed against her, breathing heavily. "We need to get you to a hospital," she insisted, helping him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, unable to put weight on his injured leg. "The plans are safe," he said through gritted teeth, clutching the waterproof case. "I don't care about the plans," she snapped, guiding him toward her car. "You could have been killed." As she drove through the flooded streets toward the emergency room, Dominic drifted in and out of consciousness beside her. Fear gripped her heart with icy fingers. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Please, just stay with me." Hours later, sitting beside his hospital bed, Olivia confronted emotions she'd been avoiding for weeks. The doctors had confirmed that Dominic was lucky a fractured fibula, lacerations requiring stitches, and a mild concussion. It could have been much worse. As he slept, sedated by pain medication, she studied his face. The arrogant air she'd first met in Portugal was gone, replaced by someone who would risk his safety for a garden that mattered to her. Someone who worked barehanded in mud and rain to protect something they'd built together. When he finally woke, groggy and disoriented, his first words were, "Is the garden okay?" Olivia laughed through unexpected tears. "Parts of it will rebuild the rest." His hand found hers on the edge of the bed. "We're good at that." Rebuilding. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't pull away. During his recovery, something shifted between them. Olivia found herself bringing lunch to his apartment, discussing design modifications as his leg healed. Their professional boundaries softened into something more personal, more honest. One evening, as she helped him organize project files in his living room, she discovered an old journal tucked among his books. It fell open to reveal pressed flowers she recognized from their summer in Lisbon. "You kept these," she said softly, touching the delicate petals preserved between the pages. Dominic looked up, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "They were all I had left of you." That night, sitting on his balcony beneath a sky washed clean by the recent storms, he finally told her the whole story, not just about his family's criminal connections, but about the years after, how he'd worked with authorities at great personal risk, how he'd protected her by staying away, how he'd watched her build her program from afar, proud but heartbroken. "When Valentina died, everything changed," he explained. "She knew about you. We had an understanding our marriage was for protection, for appearances. She encouraged me to find you when it was safe. I'm sorry she didn't get the chance to live freely," Olivia said sincerely. "So am I." He looked out at the city lights. "I've made so many mistakes, Olivia, but loving you was never one of them." Roots of Renewal. The grand opening of the Green Space Healing Center at Vega Sustainable Resort drew press from across the country. What had begun as a partnership born from complicated history had blossomed into something revolutionary, a luxury eco-hotel, seamlessly integrated with therapeutic gardens open to the public. Behind the scenes, Olivia adjusted floral arrangements while her team prepared for the first official tour. The garden had exceeded even her ambitious vision: 5 acres of thoughtfully designed spaces, from meditative labyrinths to community vegetable gardens, sensory pathways for memory care patients. and private nooks for therapeutic sessions. Nervous, Dominic appeared beside her, looking distinguished despite the cane he still occasionally used after his injury. Terrified, she admitted with a smile, but the good kind of terrified. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. In the 6 months since the storm, they had rebuilt more than just the garden. Slowly, carefully, they had reconstructed trust, rediscovered connection, and cultivated something neither had dared hope for, a second chance. Your grandmother's roses look beautiful, he noted, gesturing toward the heritage rose garden that had become a focal point of the design. Olivia nodded, emotion welling in her throat. Her grandmother had passed away 2 months earlier, but not before seeing the garden take shape. Those final weeks, pushing her wheelchair through the partially completed pathways, it had brought a clarity to her dementia that the doctors couldn't explain, but Olivia understood perfectly the healing power of growing things. The ceremony began with speeches and ribbon, but the real magic happened afterward, as visitors explored the gardens for the first time. Olivia watched as veterans with PTSD found peace in the meditation grove, as children from the oncology ward laughed among the butterfly gardens, as elderly patients from the memory care unit touched familiar herbs and remembered. This was everything she had dreamed of creating, and beside her stood the man who had helped make it possible. Later that evening, when the crowds had departed and twilight settled over the garden, Dominic led her to a secluded corner they'd designed. Together, a small grove with a bench nestled among jasmine and moonflowers that released their fragrance as darkness fell. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a journal, its leather cover embossed with intertwining vines. When she opened it, she found a pressed jasmine flower, the same variety that had scented her apartment in Lisbon years ago. "For new memories," he explained. Beneath the flower was a small velvet box. Olivia's breath caught as she opened it to reveal not a ring, but a delicate key. "It's to my home," Dominic said quietly. "No pressure, no expectations, just ... an open door, whenever you're ready." Olivia looked up at him, this man who had lost everything and rebuilt his life with purpose and integrity, the man who had never stopped loving her, even from a distance. "What if I'm ready now?" she asked softly. In the garden they had created from broken dreams and second chances, surrounded by the scent of night-blooming flowers, Dominic took her face in his hands. "Then welcome home," he whispered before kissing her. Their story had come full circle, from a summer romance cut brutally short to a partnership forged through shared purpose and painful honesty. What had once been silence now bloomed in the open, roots reaching deep into soil made richer by the storms. They had weathered together. As moonlight filtered through the leaves above them, Olivia realized that the most powerful garden she had ever helped create was this, the careful tending of love that had refused to die, even when buried beneath years of absence and misunderstanding. Some plants needed darkness before they could grow toward the light. Some hearts needed breaking before they could heal stronger than before. And sometimes, the most beautiful blooms emerged from the deepest wounds if only given the chance to grow again.